During dinner, my dad said, "Your niece is the only one who'll amount to anything, not your boy." Everyone laughed. My 8-year-old stayed silent. I replied, "All right. Then I'm done paying her $1,600 tuition." My sister went still. My dad clutched my arm and whispered, "Please, not here." And then, at dinner, my dad casually dropped a line that still rings in my ears, saying that my sister's daughter was the only one who'd ever amount to anything, unlike my kid, and the table erupted in laughter, all of them except my 8-year-old son, who just sat there silent, while I shrugged and said, "Cool," adding that in that case I'd stop covering the $1,600 tuition I pay for my niece's school, which made my sister Melissa go stiff as a board, and my dad grabbed my arm under the table to hiss, "Please, not here." The whole thing was supposed to be a simple family dinner, nothing dramatic, just a quiet Sunday evening at my parents' place to celebrate my mom's birthday, and I'd even baked a carrot cake that my son Jake proudly carried into the kitchen when we arrived, making me think for a moment that maybe this time would be different, that I could get through a few hours by smiling, nodding, and keeping the peace. Melissa was already there when we showed up, planted at the head of the table like she always is, favorite child energy and all, even when she's not the host, with her daughter Lily sitting right beside her in a frilly dress strung with pearls, 9 years old and already booked solid like a CEO, bouncing from ballet to violin to soccer to some new coding class, one thing after another without end. Jake is 8 and instead of trophies he brings home sketchbooks full of monsters, talks nonstop about sharks and volcanoes, and asks quiet, thoughtful questions that most people miss, and while that's not something you can parade around at a dinner party, I see how his mind works and how deeply he thinks, and to me he's everything. Dinner kicked off the usual way, my mom rambling about her neighbors, Melissa launching into another bragfest about Lily's last recital, and how the instructor called her gifted and suggested a private coach, while I nodded politely and kept my mouth shut, because I've grown used to being the background character in a family that treats Melissa's kid like royalty and mine like an afterthought. Then my dad stood up with his glass, thanked everyone for coming, talked about how proud he was, and finally turned his attention to Lily with that odd look, like she was some mix of a genius and a prodigy, before saying that his nieces were the only ones who'd really make something of themselves, locking eyes with me as he added, "Not like your boy." And the laughter that followed wasn't nervous or hesitant, it was loud and real, with Melissa cackling, my mom not even flinching, Lily giggling, without understanding, and Jake looking up at me in a way I'll never forget. He didn't cry or speak, but something shifted in his eyes like a light dimming, and I quietly put down my fork, met my dad's stare and said, "Cool," explaining that I'd stopped paying Lily's $1,600 tuition, which sucked the air out of the room so fast you could hear the clock behind the fridge ticking. Melissa stared at me like I'd spoken another language, my mom opened her mouth then thought better of it, and my dad leaned in, gripping my arm and whispering, "Please, not here," while I stayed silent as Melissa leaned back with a smug half-smile and said it wasn't about money but about raising kids who actually do something, praising Lily's drive and dismissing Jake as someone who just kind of floats. My heart was pounding so hard I could feel it in my jaw, and when I looked at Jake again he was staring at his napkin like he wanted to disappear. So I stood up and said we were leaving, and Jake followed me without a word as I heard my mom mutter that I was being dramatic and Melissa laugh, leaving the gift on the table and skipping the goodbyes as we walked out without looking back. That night, sometime after midnight, Jake climbed into my bed and whispered if he was weird because he didn't like sports, and I told him no, that he was incredible, and I meant every word, and the next morning I logged into the school payment portal and canceled the recurring tuition transfer without telling anyone. Not Melissa, not my parents, and they didn't call or text right away. Though I knew when they did it wouldn't be to apologize but to panic. The days after the dinner were eerily quiet, no snide messages from Melissa, no passive-aggressive calls from my mom, not even a guilt-soaked Bible verse forwarded from my dad, which told me this silence wasn't peace but pressure building, especially with tuition due Thursday, a bill I'd been covering every month for over a year along with all the random Venmo requests Melissa sent like I was an ATM, even though it was never my job, just something I offered once after her husband lost work and somehow became permanent. Thursday came and went with no charge to my account and no reaction from anyone, that tense kind of quiet where people are waiting to see if you'll fold. But I didn't, and Friday morning while I was packing Jake's lunch my phone buzzed with a message from Melissa asking if the school had messed up Lily's tuition since it didn't go through, which I ignored while slicing apples and dropping Jake at school before finally replying hours later that I'd canceled it. After 3 minutes of silence, she wrote back asking if I was joking and blaming it on Dad's comment, calling it teasing, which I ignored, followed by another message accusing me of punishing a child over a dumb joke and telling me to grow up. And by lunchtime I had 5 missed calls from her, 2 from my mom and 1 from my dad, which I knew meant things were serious since he never calls unless something's broken or dead. Then came my mom's message, short and dripping with guilt, asking if we could talk and reminding me how important Lily's schooling was and how much Melissa was going through, which almost made me laugh because that's always code for Melissa overspending again and expecting me to clean it up. And by 5 o'clock my mom was at my door with a bag of groceries she pretended were for me but were mostly junk Jake doesn't even eat, sitting down like it was a friendly visit before jumping straight in. To say I was being petty, that Lily shouldn't suffer because I felt insulted, that holding grudges like this wasn't healthy, and then she said the part that really hit me, telling me, "Let's be honest, Ash, you're not struggling." She laid it out like a checklist, saying I've got a solid job, no mortgage hanging over my head, no husband and no one depending on me except myself and Jake, while Melissa's husband Tom is raising 2 kids and Lily is gifted and needs that school. And I finally asked her the one question I've been swallowing for years, why it's always me footing the bill for everything Melissa needs. And she just blinked and gave me that pitying look like I was clueless about how family is supposed to work. When she left, she kissed Jake on the head, didn't even look at me, and said she hoped I'd come to my senses before I made things worse. And that night my dad called and I answered. And the calm in his voice scared me more than yelling ever could because he said I was being disrespectful, that I was letting a childish moment tear apart family bonds, actually used the word vindictive, and warned that Jake would grow up watching me push away the people closest to us and learn the wrong lessons from it. I asked him flat out if he really believed what he said at dinner was harmless, and after a pause he brushed it off as a joke, saying if I couldn't handle a little teasing then maybe I wasn't as tough as I thought, and that's when I hung up. Saturday came and went, then Sunday too, quiet but heavy, and I knew deep down this wasn't finished. And sure enough, Monday morning my dad texted that they were stopping by the next day just to clear the air. And staring at my phone I got this uneasy feeling that they weren't coming to make peace at all. But I said sure anyway and cleaned the house top to bottom like I was bracing for something I couldn't name yet. They pulled into the driveway exactly at 10 on the dot, like it was an appointment, my dad stepping out first with his arms crossed like he was ready for a fight he'd pretend he didn't start, my mom trailing behind with a pie wrapped in foil, smiling like everything was normal. And we barely got past the door before they marched into the living room and sat down like they owned the place while I stood across from them with my arms folded. My mom took the lead, talking about how they just wanted to check in, how the past week had been hard on everyone, how Melissa was emotional and didn't mean everything she said, how Lily was confused and upset about maybe not going to her school anymore. And I just nodded because I've heard this routine 100 times, where it's all about feelings and never about accountability, all about my reaction and never about what pushed me there. Then she dropped the line she'd clearly been saving, telling me Lily was just a child and that I was punishing a 9-year-old because I'd been embarrassed at dinner, and that it wasn't who I am, and after a second I told her calmly that I wasn't punishing anyone, I just wasn't paying anymore. That's when my dad finally chimed in, saying family doesn't walk away, family helps when needed, and I asked him if mocking my son in front of everyone counted as help, and he didn't answer, just shifted in his seat and looked past me like the conversation was suddenly beneath him. I think they realized then I wasn't budging because the mood changed fast, my mom asking to heat up the pie and mentioning whipped cream for Jake like it was some peace offering, and I told her fine and she headed to the kitchen smiling like she'd won something, while my dad stood up a minute later and said he needed the bathroom. I pointed him down the hall and sat there without thinking much of it until a few minutes passed and something felt wrong. The bathroom light wasn't on, the door wasn't shut, and when I walked down the hall I found him in my bedroom with my dresser drawer open, holding the envelope I keep hidden under old t-shirts, the emergency cash I'd been saving for months in case the car broke down or Jake needed something fast. We just froze there, him staring at the envelope then at me, before he slowly put it back and brushed past me like nothing happened, and when I followed him out I saw my mom still in the kitchen by the stove with the pie untouched, and the look on her face told me she already knew, that this had all been planned, a distraction and a search. I told them both to leave and this time they didn't argue, my dad grabbing his keys, my mom skipping the goodbye, and after I locked the door behind them I slid down onto the hallway floor and stared at the carpet for a long time, realizing it wasn't really about the money but about what it meant, that they felt entitled to whatever I had, even what I tried to keep for emergencies, that they'd crossed that line without shame just to squeeze more out of me because I was the one who could afford it and the one who always caught Melissa when she fell. That night I texted Melissa and told her to figure it out because I was done, and less than a minute later she fired back calling me unbelievable, accusing me of letting a child suffer to prove a point over a joke, throwing in that I'd always been jealous and this was a new low, and I didn't respond, instead walking into Jake's room where he was asleep, tangled in his blankets with one hand resting on an open notebook. He'd drawn a great white shark with a speech bubble that said, "Don't mess with my mom," and sitting on the edge of his bed in the dark I made him a promise that I wouldn't let them touch one more piece of our life, not through guilt, shame, sneak attacks or fake visits, and that they could figure out Lily's tuition on their own because if they wanted to invest in her future they could open their own wallets, since mine was officially closed. I didn't plan any of it, but the next morning after making Jake breakfast, packing his lunch and folding laundry, something inside me finally clicked. It felt like this sudden pressure in my chest, like I couldn't carry it another minute, not later and not someday but right then, so I got in the car and drove straight to my parents' house without texting or calling first, already knowing Melissa wouldn't be home because Tuesdays were always Lily's soccer practice mixed with tutoring, the very things I used to pay for without a second thought, and the irony of that wasn't lost on me at all. I was finally heading back to the place where all the guilt had taken root, and she'd be off kicking a ball and memorizing vocabulary lists I probably funded last semester. My mom answered the door acting like I dropped by for a friendly visit, smiling and saying, "Well, look who finally came to her senses," but I walked right past her without responding and went straight into the kitchen, where my dad sat at the table sipping coffee and scrolling on his iPad, not even looking up as he said it took me long enough and suggested we move past all this. I stayed on my feet and told him I was there for my spare keys, which finally made him look up, while my mom let out this small sound behind me, half disappointment and half disbelief, like I'd just done something cruel, telling me I couldn't be serious and calling me dramatic, and I just turned to her and asked where they were. She hesitated, crossed her arms, clearly not wanting to hand them over, but after a few seconds she sighed, walked down the hallway, and came back holding a small ceramic dish, the kind she used to keep peppermints in, with my keys inside, the front door key, the garage remote, even the spare gate key I barely remembered giving them. I took them and told them plainly that I didn't want them letting themselves into my house anymore. Not for surprises, not for favors, not ever. And that's when my dad stood up and accused me of throwing away my whole family over one dinner. I told him it wasn't just an insult, that he humiliated my son, laughed at him in front of everyone, and when that didn't work, came into my home and tried to take from me, which made him snap that he wasn't stealing, just checking to see if I had anything to spare since I'd always helped. And I told him that was exactly the problem, because it isn't help when it's expected, it's exploitation. He stared at me like he couldn't believe I'd say that out loud, and my mom jumped in trying to smooth it over, saying I didn't need to turn it into a war, and that they'd always been proud of me, but Lily showed more effort, had goals, and wasn't passive like Jake, which stopped me cold. I repeated Jake's name back to her, and she rushed to say she didn't mean it like that, only that he didn't seem interested in anything, and when she pointed out that Lily was 9, I looked at both of them and told them they thought I was doing this out of bitterness, but I was done laughing off the way they turned my kid into a punchline every time I tried to protect him. I said I wasn't joking anymore, and my mom stepped closer, lowering her voice to warn me I was making a mistake, that Jake would resent me for cutting them out, that I was isolating him and teaching him he didn't have a family, and I didn't answer that at all. I just turned toward the door. As I was leaving, my dad muttered that I'd regret it, that I'd come back like I always did. And I stopped long enough to say that I used to, but not anymore. Then I walked out with my keys and didn't look back. Later that night I saw a notification that Melissa had posted something online, a vague, whining status about how some people would rather let a child suffer than let go of their bitterness and how disgusting jealousy can be, and I didn't react, but 10 minutes later she texted me saying they told her I took the keys and asking if this was really what I wanted, accusing me of going full psycho and burning everything down, then following it up by telling me to enjoy my quiet little life and that I'd be forgotten before Lily hit high school. That one stuck with me, not because it hurt, but because it made something clear, that to them my boundaries, my silence, even my love for my son meant nothing if it didn't benefit them. And they were right about one thing: it was going to be quiet because I wasn't replying to another message, sending another check, or going back. After I walked out of their house with my keys, I really believed that would be the end of it. Not that they'd apologize, but that they'd at least back off, complain about me behind my back for a while, and let it die, because I was done playing their games, done fixing Melissa's messes, and done pretending DNA alone made us a family, but they weren't done with me. At first it was just background noise, another vague post online about relatives who sabotage out of jealousy, then a couple of texts from my mom acting like nothing happened, checking in on Jake, asking if I wanted her to bring by something she baked, and I ignored all of it, leaving it unread and unwanted, until calls started coming in from numbers I didn't recognize, one from the ballet teacher and another from the school office, both saying there was an issue with the payment method and asking if I'd be fixing it, and each time I calmly told them no, that I wasn't responsible for any future payments and they needed to contact Lily's parents directly, which felt good in a way I didn't expect. The part that didn't feel good came 4 days later on a Thursday night, after I'd worked late and Jake had already eaten and was drawing at the kitchen table, when I went into my room to change and noticed my nightstand drawer slightly open just an inch or so, but I never leave it that way because Jake once spilled juice in it and I've been obsessive about closing it ever since. That was the first warning sign, and the second was the faint smell in the room. A cheap, heavy aftershave I recognized immediately because my dad always wore too much of it, and as I checked the rest of the bedroom, then the hallway, and finally the door leading into the garage, my stomach dropped. The door was locked, but the bolt had scratch marks on it, not broken or forced, just scuffed enough to tell me someone had tried. And then it hit me that the week before I'd had a plumber over and left the garage side door unlocked while he worked, and that same afternoon my dad had stopped by to drop off a package and acted strangely offended when I wouldn't let him inside. I pulled up the garage camera feed and my stomach sank because it wasn't just missing footage, the whole thing had been disconnected, the cord literally unplugged from the wall. And when I went back into my bedroom and checked again, nothing was missing. My emergency cash was still there. But it was obvious someone had been inside the house without knocking, without permission, moving quietly like they'd done it before. Like they still believed they had a right to my space. I didn't sleep at all that night. I stayed awake watching Jake breathe, gripping the baseball bat I keep by the door, my heart jumping every time a car drove past. And the next morning I finally did what I should have done a long time ago and changed every single lock, the front door, the side door, the garage, then paid for a new security system and upgraded the cameras to ones with cloud backups. After that I called the school, the ballet studio, and the tutor again just to be sure my name was fully removed from their records permanently, and then I did something I never imagined I'd need to do and filed a police report, not naming names, just stating there'd been a possible unauthorized entry and that I was taking it seriously. And when the officer asked if I had any suspicions, I met his eyes and said I had a few people in mind. That same day I blocked every number I could, my mom, my dad, Melissa, all of them, deleted the old family group chat, and made sure Jake's school had only my number listed with no emergency contacts unless I personally approved them, even removing my parents from the pickup list. That night while I was tucking Jake in, he asked me, "Mom, are we mad at Grandma and Grandpa?" And I paused before telling him we weren't mad, just keeping our distance. And when he asked why, I told him it was because they weren't being kind to us, and sometimes even family has to be walked away from if they keep hurting you. And he nodded like that made total sense before saying he thought they'd always been kind of mean to me, and in that moment I knew I'd done the right thing. The next day a letter showed up in my mailbox with no return address, just a printed page saying if I wanted to cut them off then fine, but one day I'd need them and they wouldn't be there. That Jake would grow up knowing I pushed away the only real family he had. Unsigned but unmistakable. And I read it once before burning it in my kitchen sink and watching it turn to ash. That's when it became clear there was never real love there, only expectations and control wrapped up as tradition. So I did the one thing they never expected and let them go, not with another argument or dramatic goodbye, but quietly, completely, and for good. I didn't feel lighter right away, and that's something no one warns you about, because cutting off toxic people, even when you're right, doesn't bring instant relief. It comes in waves, some calm and some so heavy they knock the breath out of you. And there were days I second-guessed myself, wondered if I'd gone too far, or worried Jake might one day ask why he barely knew his extended family, but then something small would happen, like finding one of his drawings taped to the fridge or overhearing him tell a friend I was his favorite person in the world, and I'd remember exactly why I did it. Weeks passed with no letters, no emails, no surprise visits. Melissa never apologized, my parents never reached out again. Not even for Jake's birthday, which they used to make a big show of. No card, no call, nothing. And while I expected they might try reaching out through a cousin or neighbor, they didn't. It was like I'd been erased, and that should have hurt more than it did. But instead it just confirmed what I already knew. That they only wanted me when I was useful. Jake asked about them less and less, sometimes mentioning Lily when something reminded him of the things we used to do together, like science kits or museum trips. And I never spoke badly about anyone. I just told him that sometimes people don't stay in your life the way you expect them to. One night about a month later, while I was tucking him in, he said he liked our house better now. And when I asked why, he told me it was quieter and felt like nobody was going to come in and be mean to me. and that nearly broke me, so I sat with him long after he fell asleep thinking about the years I spent being the helper, the buffer, the one everyone leaned on without ever asking how heavy it all was, thinking about how they talked about Jake like he was a problem just for being himself, and especially about the moment I caught my dad in my room holding that envelope like it belonged to him, because that was when they lost me for good. I used to think family worked like a bank account, that if you kept depositing love, time, and loyalty you'd eventually get something back. But that's not true when you're the only one putting anything in and everyone else is withdrawing. Now it's just me and Jake, and I budget better, not just money but energy. I say no without guilt. I don't flinch when someone says family should always come first, because family isn't about last names, it's about who shows up, who gives without keeping score, who protects your kid instead of laughing at him across a dinner table. They live their lives now, and I hear things through mutual friends, Melissa telling people I abandoned Lily, my mom saying I turned cold after making some money, my dad staying mostly quiet from what I'm told, and that's fine, they can talk themselves in circles until they forget the truth because I'm not waiting for an apology anymore. Jake is thriving, writing stories, building things, learning chess, and last week he told me he wants to be a marine biologist who also writes books, and I told him that sounded perfect, and I made myself a quiet but unbreakable promise that he will never again sit at a table feeling small because someone who's supposed to love him turns him into a joke, not ever, not even family. We're okay now, more than okay.